In this lecture, we'll talk about the concept of urban heat island and how urbanization contributes to this particular effect of urban heat island. So we'll try to talk about it in this particular lecture. As you know, we are talking about various environmental problems related to urbanization in this particular chapter. So today we'll be talking about this issue of urban heat island. Now, what do we mean by urban heat island? Now, simply all of you know what do we mean by island. So island is a landmass which is surrounded by water on all the sides. So what will be a heat island? So heat island will be an area which is very hot, area which is releasing a lot of heat, and it is surrounded by the area which is relatively cooler, right? So cities are the kind of reservoirs of heat. Lot of heat is trapped, a lot of heat is stored in the cities because of various reasons that we'll talk about. So because of that, what happens that urban areas, the temperature in the urban areas remains higher, relatively higher compared to the surrounding rural areas. So imagine a city located in between, and then there are rural areas surrounded by it, and rural areas have relatively less temperature while urban areas have relatively higher temperature, right? So urban area or a city becomes an island of heat surrounded by cooler, relatively cooler rural areas. So that's what basically the urban heat island concept is. So how it is defined? So urban heat island is defined as an urban area or a metropolitan area that is significantly warmer than its surrounding rural areas due to human activities, right? So this is what I was talking about. And why the city becomes a heat reservoir? What is reservoir? Where the heat is stored, right? So why the heat is stored? Heat gets stored because it gets trapped. It becomes difficult for the heat to escape out of the city. So it becomes, while the heat, more and more heat is generated in the city, but relatively less heat can escape outside the city, making the cities very hot. Now this particular effect, that the temperature of the city is higher than the temperature of the surrounding rural area, this particular effect was noticed first time by Luke Howard in the year 1810, and the term urban heat island was coined by H.E. Landsberg in 1981. So this particular phenomenon is observed by Luke Howard, and this phenomenon was named as urban heat island by another person called H.E. Landsberg in the year 1981. Okay, so as I already said, that the cities, the temperature in the cities remain higher than the temperature of the surrounding rural areas. So usually we find that the annual mean temperature of the city remains 1 degree to 3 degrees Celsius higher than the surrounding urban areas. This is average annual mean air temperature we are talking about. Now these differences between temperature between urban and rural areas are much larger at night as compared to the day, right? So this is what, in a nutshell, the meaning of urban heat island is. Now this particular diagram very much show that particular effect. So please see that on this baseline we have a city center at the center of this graph, and then this city center is surrounded by, as you can see, villages, or you can say forest and villages. So rural area. So urban area is surrounded by rural area. Now if we plot the temperature of these rural as well as urban areas, then we get a line graph of this kind, right? So where you can easily see that the highest point or the peak of this particular graph is exactly above where the city center is located, right? So it shows that at the city center, the temperatures are extremely higher, right? And as you move away from the city towards the rural areas, then we find that the temperature drops down. Or if you see in the opposite way, that is, if you are traveling from rural area to the city, then we see that the temperature increases. And when you leave the urban area and go away from the urban area towards the city, temperature decreases. So that brings, so in this line graph, actually, you can see the island, that island effect, where the cities become the reservoirs of heat, and compared to the surrounding rural areas which are relatively cooler, right? This diagram is compulsory. It should be there in your answer. We'll talk about it when we'll try to sum up. Now, there are multiple sources through which heat is generated in the cities. It is not just sunlight. Okay, so heat is not received in the city just by sunlight. Okay, but it is also emitted, no, because of vehicles. It is also emitted because of industries. It is also emitted because of various gadgets that we use, such as air conditioners, right? Similarly, when during the day the surface, the land surface absorbs the heat, and during the night that absorbed heat is released out, right? So we can see that even the heat is released from the surfaces, from the land surfaces. So there are various factors that lead to, or that emits heat in the city, right? And there are also some factors that helps in cooling of the city temperature. For example, trees, so they have a cooling effect, or vegetation have a cooling effect, or water bodies have a cooling effect, right? So the way there are sources of heat, there are also sources with which the temperature can be brought down. But again, as you know, the problem is that in the wake of urbanization, construction, development, we remove the trees, as well as number of water bodies get polluted. Many a times smaller water bodies like lakes and ponds, etc., they are reclaimed, and they are used for construction, right? So the factors that help city cool down are almost not there, or not present in the city, while the factors that emit heat, that contribute to heat, are in a very large number. Now, this imbalance lead to heating of the city. Now, one of the important causes that lead to this particular effect is very large built-up area in the city, which is very obvious. So cities are, as we say, concrete jungles. So they're made up of concrete, right? And we have seen that concrete absorbs much large amount of heat, right? So more and more concrete, it may be in the form of road, or it may be in the form of construction or constructed buildings, we find more and more heat is absorbed during the day. Now, this heat which is absorbed during the day, okay, during the night, as I was saying, it is released back to the atmosphere. So that is called as outgoing radiation, outgoing terrestrial radiation. So heat is released out of the land surface, right? And from where that heat comes from the absorption of the heat during the day. Now that heat is released during the night. Now that is cooling effect. If the heat absorbed is released, if it leaves that body or the surface, then obviously that surface will cool down. However, because in cities we do not have extensive grounds or a flat surface, open lands, okay, the escape of such radiations becomes very difficult, because these radiations which are outgoing are blocked by tall buildings surrounded, all over the city. Now this lead to this does not allow that outgoing radiation to escape the city very easily. Similarly, we find that wind also plays a very significant role, because wind plays a significant role in cooling. So if a wind is passing over a warm surface or a hot surface, it will cool down it will cool the surface in the process. But the problem is that again, because there is so much of construction and skyscrapers and tall buildings, we find that wind cannot blow smoothly over the city. So that wind gets blocked by buildings. So obviously, this cooling mechanism via wind system also cannot take place. Now, as a result, we find that the temperatures or the heat starts building up in the city. As I was telling you that forests or the vegetation are cooling mechanisms. But if you are cutting down the trees to construct roads, to construct railways, or to expand railway lines, or to construct more and more buildings, obviously the cutting down of the tree will not, rather will give rise to more and more heat, because the cooling effect that the trees bring because of the evapotranspiration process will not work. Okay. Plus, trees provide us with the shade. They do not allow the dense canopies of the trees do not allow the sunlight to directly reach the ground. So that also contribute to cooling. But if there are no trees, there is no evapotranspiration, there are no canopies, and obviously it will increase to the it will increase or enhance the urban heat island effect. Similarly, we all know that plants are reservoirs or storehouse of carbon, because they inhale carbon. Now, if we remove the trees, or rather, as we remove the trees in the city, now the carbon that is released in the city in a very large volume from industries, from vehicles, etc., we find that there is this removal of this carbon dioxide which is generated in the city is not possible. And you have learned that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and therefore it has a tendency to absorb the heat and trap the heat. So more and more heat that is generated in the city gets trapped because of more carbon content in the air of the cities. And this carbon could have been removed by the trees, but again we are also removing the trees. So overall, it again contributes to the process of heating. As I've already talked about, that the large number of industries, large number of vehicles also lead to emission of heat. There are many gadgets that we use, televisions, air conditioners, etc., that also emit tremendous heat. So now we look at, if you see the huge population of the cities and a large number of most of that population using such gadgets, if you see the sum total of all that, then a large number of heat is emitted through such domestic sources as well. We very well know about high levels of air pollution, and as I was mentioning that air pollution in the cities mainly, which is a vehicular or of industrial origin, and the carbon that it leads to, that it generates or that it emits, is a greenhouse gas, and it traps more and more heat. Right. So you can see there are a number of factors playing the role together simultaneously. I mean, more and more heat is generated, right? But the cooling mechanism is not taking place very effectively, right? The heat is not escaping easily out of the city, plus the cooling is also not happening. So the point that I was making, that the city becomes a reservoir of heat. Now, if such a huge built-up of heat in the city leads to number of effects. For example, there are negative effects on certain animals. Animals will not be able to sustain such a huge heat. So fish, for example, the aquatic organisms like fish, so there are a lot of negative impacts on them because of extremely high temperatures in the cities. I mean, in this case, of the water bodies. But in other cases, we find that insects like mosquitoes or ants and few more animals like common house gecko or gray-headed flying fox, among these animals or even microorganisms like bacteria, we find that their population increases due to more heat. So higher the heat, more it boosts the growth of these animals. right? And some of these animals are creating problem. They may create problem. For example, if there are pathogenic bacteria, then it will lead to diseases. Mosquitoes, all of us know that how they cause different kinds of fevers. So higher the heat, more the population of such insects like mosquitoes, and obviously it will have more impact on the health of the residents, right? Similarly, as I was mentioning, that is not the only way that the human health is impacted because of urban heat island, but there is direct impact also of increased heat. So people suffer from heat stroke, heat exhaustion, or heat syncope, or heat cramps. So there are various physiological responses to of human body to increased heat, right? If and it also lead to damages the organ functions if the people are exposed to such a heat for a very long period of time. Respiratory distress syndrome, feeling of suffocation because of extreme heat, also is one of the impact on physical health. The way physical health is impacted, we also find mental health also has a tremendous impact. And one of the major effect is on cognition. Cognition is how we try to sense the world around, how we try to understand the grasp the world around. So in extreme heat, people feel more disoriented, right? I mean, their cognition, their understanding of their surroundings, get blurred, and they won't understand what's happening, where exactly are they going. So they cannot understand the way their body or their cognition is functioning. And it leads to, if people are exposed to such a condition for a longer period of time, it leads to number of health issues. I mean, cognitive health issues or mental health issues such as depression and dementia, etc. I mean that urban heat island effect contributes to, or is one of the factor that leads to such kind of problems. Effect on behavior is very, we all have observed staying in Mumbai, in such a hot and humid city. So we all know that when there is extreme heat, we very much feel very irritated, frustrated, and such kind of a mindset or such kind of emotional response to heat lead to a more aggression, right? And always give example of the quarrels and the fights that we see in a very crowded suburban trains, where we find that for a very for a very minor kind on issue, people start fighting and hitting each other in the train. No, I mean that happens. I mean, crowding is one factor, but at the same time, extreme heat is another factor. So that makes people irritated, frustrated, and make them more aggressive, and then it also indirectly, lead to crimes, right? So these are some of the significant effects. Another important effect of extreme heat in urban area is obviously that people will run their air conditioners, their refrigerators to their full capacity. So because of that, we know that during summer season, when the heat is too much, we find that there is a lot of energy demand, lot of demand for electricity, and so much of electricity if is the cities are unable to generate, right? And as a result, we find number of places in the city experiencing load sheddings or electricity cuts, and all such related issues. So increasing energy demand is one of the significant effect of the urban heat island. So that's all. Again, you have a 10-mark question in exam. What is an urban heat island? What are its causes and effects? So it's a 10-mark question. So you will talk about the concept of heat island, urban heat island, for about 2 marks. See that you are giving that, drawing that diagram here in this particular topic. Then for 4 marks, you will talk about causes. So 4 main points we talked about: built up areas in the city, deforestation, or heat emission from industries and vehicles, and very high levels of air pollution. On all these points, you have to write paragraphs right? So that the content should be good enough to have 4 marks. As I said, we all are living in the cities, and therefore you can very well give your own example or examples from your own cities to enrich your answer. For the C part or the last part of your answer should be effects. So here again for 4 marks, you will talk about how urban heat islands affects animals, how it affects human health, human behavior, human physical as well as mental health, and also how it brings stress on energy generation, which already we are facing a shortage of. And so these effects you can talk about. So that will give you a good 10-mark answer or 10-mark content. Again, I hope you have understood this particular topic. Please read the textbook, this particular portion, this particular part from the textbook. Go through the online resources provided on the Google Classroom. And if you still have a problem, you can very well meet me to resolve them. Thanks a lot. Let's talk.